we have scheduled for this week. Let me pull up my fancy dancy schedule. Um, I believe we were supposed to do a quiz last week, and I pushed it to this week. And I think we've also got, let me pull up Moodle just to make sure. In the wrong class for Moodle. Time down to Moodle. Okay, now I'm in the right one. Let's see here. I've got a review. I got a website review next week that's due. So website review next week, a website template that's due next week, and a test that we moved to this week from last week because of everything that was going on. I didn't want to overburden you guys last week, and then especially when you guys got the instructions that you had to move out. I didn't know how many people were already in the process of moving out or had to move out and find travel arrangements, and I didn't think you guys needed a quiz on top of that. I thought that had been just too much. So what I want to do this week, last week we talked about all the different types of links that you can have. So links inside of a web page, links going to other pages inside of your site, then external links, and we talked also about doing nested selectors. That way you could control the way links worked within different environments with CSS. And we kind of rushed that part at the end, and so I just want to go over that one last little bit, if that's okay with you guys, just to make sure that there was no confusion about that. Like I said, that was kind of a last minute thing. Let me share my screen so you can see that. Okay, y'all should be able to see my screen now, or will in just a second.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked first about having your single selector. It's just a tag, and then we can set our rule set from that. But then we said sometimes and quite often we need to do this, which is a multi-tag selector. So I want to be able to define my anchor tags because I want them to look a certain way. But I also want to define my anchor tags inside of my navigation to look differently than if they were inside just a regular page. So we can use a multi-selector, and we've seen a little bit of this before, so this isn't completely foreign, but I just wanted to make sure that you guys were really comfortable with that and seeing how it worked. Now I've got, let me pull up, where did it, okay, it's right down here. That's old code, you don't care about that. Okay, so here we have, if something's in a header and an anchor tag, it gets the color of white. If it's in a navigation and an anchor tag, then we're setting its family, we're setting its font size, those types of things. And if we look at this, okay, we saw how we have, this link here is a link inside of an anchor tag inside of a header. These links are also inside of a header, and so they both get that rule that is the header A, which is specifying the color to be white. Okay? Because here we have header, navigation, and A. So notice, and the reason why I did this is I want you to notice that it doesn't have to be a direct descendant of my header tag. Now, this anchor tag is inside of a paragraph tag inside of a header. And so neither one of these are direct descendants of my header, but because it's some sort of descendant somewhere down the line, they both get the color of white. Now, You also notice that here my nav A gets a font family of the sans serif. Well, here this is not a sans serif font. These are two different fonts which make them look differently. So these were the navigation, the nav A rules. So we're going to have um, a sans serif font. We're going to have some extra padding. We talked about by increasing the padding, we increase the clickable area. So you don't have to click on the actual link itself. You can click close to it. And in clicking close to it, it just makes it a little bit easier for people to use. I always like to think of um, maybe someone who's like a little bit older, and if you ever look at someone as they get older and they don't have as good a muscle control, they can't do those what we call fine motor skills. The motor skills were like where we're controlling our fingers and things like that. They can't do that as well. So we want to give them a little bit extra padding to make it a little bit easier for them to be able to click on that link. Um, it also is a big benefit and something you have to think about um, when we deal with what we refer to in America. We have what we call the ADA, it's the Americans for Disabilities Act, which was a rule that was very wide encompassing. It covers all types of things. It encompasses things like if you have a public store or a business, you have to be able to provide handicap bathroom stalls. Um, if you have a store, your shopping racks and aisles have to be so wide. There has to be enough distance for a person to be able to roll a wheelchair through. You can't have just steps. You have to provide some way for someone who is not as what they call ambulatory or able to walk. Um, so whether they're using crutches or a wheelchair or a walker or something like that, you got to provide either like a ramp or an elevator that they can use and access. Um, so they can be able to access the second floor or maybe even the first floor if you have a ramp that goes up from the parking lot. You have to include handicap parking spaces and all that type of stuff. And these are typically things that people think about in America when we think about the ADA. Europe has a different set of rules, which are actually a little bit more stringent. Um, so if you're doing anything in Europe that falls under the guidelines of the EU, your rules are actually a little bit more stringent. A little bit too stringent in my personal opinion, but that's a different story. Because they also fall under the headline of accessibility from uh, a website usability perspective. And websites that were not considered accessible to a person. And if you had like really small fonts, and that would hurt someone who has limited vision. They can still see, but they have limited vision. Or if you had a really small click area for your links, then that would affect someone who has something like Parkinson's, which causes a hand to tremble or other parts of the body to tremble. They lose that fine motor skill. So when we do some of these things, we think about usability. Um, and number one, we want to make it usable for a normal person to be able to access and easier for them to access, but also usability is going to encompass the idea of what could a person who has a limitation, how can we help them so they can still access and use our website or access and use our mobile app or whatever it is, because the same type things that we do inside of a website, we can actually do inside mobile apps, because there's actually technology that allows us to build a mobile friendly website and convert that into an app. Um, so whether we're building a pure native app or we're doing something like that, where we're using a website and doing the conversion process, um, we need to constantly be thinking about how will that affect someone. Um, approximately in the US, they did a study a few years ago, and they found out that approximately 10% of all the population has some sort of visual impairment. That was beyond just needing like corrective lenses like I wear. So I have corrective lenses. I can't see 20/20. I haven't seen 20/20 in many, many years. And so they're saying beyond that, not just that you need corrective lenses, but some other form of visual impairment. And that could be everything from being colorblind, which is actually the number one issue. We can talk about some different types of color blindness. It's not just color blindness. There's actually different variations. To being legally blind, I have a friend of mine who wears glasses, um, and he is legally blind in one eye. He's like 2600 or 2650 or something like that. So it makes him legally blind, but with glasses, he can actually see well enough to interact on a regular day-to-day basis. Um, but if something is like really small text or something like that, that can be a real challenge for him. Um, I have an aunt who is completely blind. Um, she has no visual acuity whatsoever. And then if you find out, she makes most of her living, what she does involves being online. And she does medical transcription through a website. And you might say, well, how can she do that? She's blind. Well, they have special software called screen readers. And there's a couple different companies that make them. Um, and they can read an application such as a web browser or other type of thing, and she can go and download an audio file that a doctor uploads, and she does the medical transcription service for them. So converting all the notes that they record, after they meet with a patient and they have a little record and they record something, or um, while they're in surgery and they're recording things, whatever, right? uh, I've never asked her exactly what type of doctor she works with, but she can use these tools. And so there's other things that we want to do to access this, and when we assess our website, learn on how to make it more accessible. One is through the padding. The other is through a good, strong contrast. So if you notice here, we used a dark color for our header, which made us use a light color for our links and for our text. We would not want to use like a medium blue. That would disappear on this type of link. It'd be very hard to see. And if we take a look at that real quick, I'm just going to make this quick change. I'm going to change where we do our color white. I can make this also be a nav anchor tag. So this is only going to affect the anchor tags that are inside of a navigation. So here we have a dark blue background and a kind of medium blue foreground color for our link. Notice that this would be kind of easy to overlook. If I was just skimming through very quickly, I would not have that sharp contrast. And so that's going to affect our usability. That's something that we need to very much consider when we are building our websites. So that's why I had made the change here to be for the header. This way, all of our headers, no matter where our link tag was inside our header, because we had two different ones, it makes it stand out. Our hover state is something that we use whenever someone puts their mouse over a link. Now, this obviously does not work if you're on a mobile phone. Um, so this is only for a desktop environment. So we don't want to rely on the hover status to give some indication that's a link. So you see here, we changed it to be an orangey type color. Once again, it's very bright. It's a natural complementary color to the dark blue. Um, we'll talk when we talk about design in a couple weeks in more detail. We'll talk about complementary colors and what that means. But your blue and your orange are complementary colors. A lot of times you see them together um, in some variation. Um, so blue and orange is the team colors of the University of Florida Gators, which is a very prominent football team in the SEC. Blue and gold, which a gold is a brighter form of orange, are the colors of the U.S. Navy that you'll see. You'll see them also used in several other businesses and stuff like that. That's how you see colors being used together, working together a lot. That's a common instance where you have a complementary color. But like I said, we'll talk about more about how you directly access those when we talk about design in just a couple of weeks in more specific detail. When we look at our code here, the creation of hover is known as being done through what we call a pseudo class. And a pseudo class is where we specify a colon, and then there's several built-in pseudo classes to CSS. The hover is by far the most common one. And technically you can hover on any thing that you wanted to. You could hover on paragraphs, you could hover on a div tag or a header or anything like that. 99.9% of the time, there's no reason to. You just want to do it on links almost all the time because that's what you're expecting. People see this and they expect it to be on a link. People expect a couple of things. They expect links to be something that you hover over, and it's going to change if you're using a desktop environment. Where desktop also includes things like laptops and other types of computer interfaces. They expect it to often be blue, not always, but usually blue, and usually be underlined. So if I have a link that's inside of my main text like this, I'm going to usually leave it underlined in blue, 9 times out of 10. It will almost always be underlined, and I won't underline anything that is not a link. We can actually set that. There is actually an underline attribute that we can set in CSS, but we're not going to do that. That's going to cause, it's not going to cause a problem, but will cause confusion on the end user. The other thing I'm going to do is the blue is going to depend upon how it fits in with the overall view of the website. Now, what I do have here is we have an underline, and I may not want the underline for my main navigation. If you think about when you go to a lot of different websites, and think about the ones you've done your website reviews that you liked and things like that, you probably noticed that they did not have underlined text for their navigation links. They might have a border around it so it looks like a box. They might have a button look to it so it has a 3D effect. They might do a lot of things, but usually not underline is one of them. So I want to show you also real quick, just like as a continuation once again from last class, how we're going to get rid of that underline for the link, and also how we can put like a little border box around it. So I'm going to first show you the border box because I want to show you how the border box works with the underline. Because a lot of times there's a little bit of confusion with that. So let's switch back to our text, excuse me, real quick. And I'm just going to specify my border is going to be white, 1 pixel, and solid. Okay, and this is just a shortcut. I could specify border dash color and then specify the color. I could specify border dash width and border dash style to define my pixel width and what type of border I'm using. Or I could just put them in like this. It's faster and easier just to write when they're all going to be on all 4 sides the same. I could go so in depth to say border dash color dash top, border dash color dash right, border dash color dash bottom. That gets crazy. Okay, we don't want crazy. So 90% of the time, 95% of the time, all 4 sides of my border are going to be the same, and so I can just write it like this. If I refresh this, you'll see my border, but notice that the underline for my text is not shown with the border of my button. Okay, and that's kind of an important thing to see because my underline is underlining the words of my text. It's not actually part of the border. Okay, so we got to keep that in mind. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here and I'm going to specify, just as an example, I'm going to specify text decoration. I'm going to set that to none. And when I set text decoration to none, you'll notice that the underline disappears. And that's kind of what I expect. Okay. Now you will also still notice when I roll over this, my border does not change. I still see that white box. I might want that orange box. I can't see that white border because it's actually right up against this white background. So if I'm going to change this, I'm going to specify a little bit of margin, top and bottom, and then I'm going to set under my navigation anchor tag hover pseudo class border dash color is also going to be orange. Okay. Now you can see actually where my link is. Okay. You notice that my header here is not going as deep as you would expect. We would have to kind of look into that. You can see exactly where my box is now. And anywhere inside that box is controlled by the padding, which makes that a clickable area. So we talked about making that bigger so it's easier for a person to click on, so it's easier for someone to use. That's shows you how big a space that's actually given. And it really depends upon who's using it. So over the summer, I built a website for um, uh, a pharmacist. I'm sorry, it took me a while to remember what it was, what they call them. I built a website for a pharmacist, and that pharmacist, their main user was people who were older. They were in their late 50s or early 60s, was the average age of the person who goes to this small pharmacist. Um, and so we did several things to make it easier for someone who's going to be a little bit older. Again, their eyesight's probably not going to be what it was when they were in their 20s or 30s. Um, just to make it easier for them. We did things like making the text larger all the way around. We made the button sizes a little bit bigger. That way they could click on them easier. Same thing with, we built a mobile version of the website. Um, and so we made it easy, if their hand was shaking a little bit or anything like that. We just want to make it as easy as we could to do that. That shows you how big that space is so that they would have to work on it. So just kind of gives you a little bit of an idea. Um, if I was building it, depending upon who I was building it for, I might make it bigger, I might make it smaller. I might change my background color. Um, it really just kind of depends. And that's an easy enough thing to do. And just to show you, sometimes people make like little tabs. Um, Here's our background color for our header. I'm just going to copy this into our nav A. So you see how it kind of hangs down so it looks like it's a little tab, just so it sticks out a little bit more. And when you roll over it, you can see how it's being affected. So that's just something that other people might do. Now, if I was doing this for someone who is older, I would not be using a single pixel border. I'd probably be using a 2 or 3 pixel wide border. Just once again, make it a little bit easier for them to see and be able to use. It doesn't take any, more coding inside of the CSS to go from a 1 pixel to 3 pixel. You just notice it just makes it a little bit bigger, a little bit easier. That's all you want. The other thing, and I did mention this in the last class, but I think it's always worth mentioning because this is an important thing whenever I use a pseudo class. And I use pseudo classes on my anchor tags that are in my regular part of my web page as well as in my navigation. So I use them all over. I think it's really good to help give the user that extra visual clue, make it easier. There's actually a book about web design and making web design easier years ago that came out. It was called Don't Make Me Think. And the whole idea was don't make the user have to think about how to use your website. It should be intuitive. Um, I'm actually teaching a class right now for software engineering, and in the software engineering class, we're going over user interface design this week. And one of the 3 rules about software interface and user interface design is to not make the user perform additional cognitive um, activity, i.e., don't make them think about how to do it. Just make it easy so they can just go, oh, I know what to do here. Um, so I'm going to use these headers and those that hover pseudo class all over the place. But a couple of quick reminders about it. I don't want to change the size of my link. So here's my link. I'm not changing the size of it. I'm just changing some colors. And whether I change foreground color or background color or both, um, I don't want to change the size of my button. Uh, I've seen more than one time you come in here on an edge and you change a font or they change a font size, and it causes me to no longer be over the link when I'm there. And so I got to move my mouse because as it creates like this flashing strobing effect as I'm over. And so I'm going to show the pseudo class. I'm not over, so I'm not going to show it. I'm over it, so I'm going to show the pseudo class. And it literally flickers your screen. Um, it's very, very difficult. So I'm not going to do anything like bold against. I'm not going to change my font size. I'm not going to change um, my width or height or my margins or my padding. Nothing that's going to affect the size. And some things that people don't think about, like making it bold or changing my font family. Fonts had different sizes. That's just your default sans serif. If I went and chose Tahoma, that would be a different size than the default, unless my browser default happens to be Tahoma, which it usually is. It usually is something like Arial or Helvetica. Um, if I change to something entirely different, Georgia or Impact or something like that, um, I could have a huge change in the size, and would cause potential problems. So we want to avoid things like that. We want to keep things as consistent as possible. Maybe just changing a color, maybe a border style if I have a border style that's not solid. Um, something like that, just to make it, still simple, uh, still easy to use, still address the fact that there is a change to it, but not something that's going to cause a screen flicker or some other issue that's going to make the website hard to see. And one of the hardest things about that is just because it's not hard to see on your machine doesn't mean it wouldn't be harder to see on someone else's machine. Just because of how wide the browser is or isn't, um, can cause things to break and flow differently. So that's an important consideration. All right, before we move on with this particular section in HTML, any other questions about the multiple selectors or CSS, or maybe styling for your navigation bar, anything like that? Just want to kind of pop it open. Any questions at all?
I'm good.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't have any questions either.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. I thought you said you had a question. Okay, no questions. Let me pull open the chat window, just make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh, where did it? Oh, chat's hidden. Okay, I'm not seeing any in the chat window. Just want to make sure if someone doesn't have a microphone, um, we can still got the chat. All right. I just got the warning that we've got about 10 minutes left because these Zoom meetings can only be 40 minutes long. So what I would like to do, let's go back. Okay, we talked about that. Um, what I'd like to do is we'll go ahead and exit out of this meeting real quick, and then we will just go back into it in about 3 to 5 minutes. It takes, like I said, a couple minutes for the other meeting to download the file, because I save all these so I can upload them to YouTube for those who can't join us for whatever reason. So let's join back in, like I said, about 3 to 5 minutes, and then we'll do a quick review for the test, and we'll talk about what we'll be doing going forward for the rest of the week, okay? Anyone have
Okay.
any problems with that?
Nope.
All right, I will see you guys in just a couple minutes.